They said that we were trash. Well, the name is Crass, not Clash. They can stuff their punk credentials, just them that take the cash. They won't charge enough for their festival talk. RAR badges and their protest wall. Bands of white men standing in a park, objecting to racism, the can in the dark. Black man's got his problems, he's right to deal with it. So don't fool yourself up with your white liberal shit. If you care to take a close look at the way things really stand, you'll see they're all just niggas to the rulers of this land.
A typical Crass gig would be a big hall with banners everywhere, very dark, a lot of people milling around, drunk punks collapsed at the back, a few skinheads trying to cause trouble, a real air of atmosphere of tension, always on the lookout for trouble starting. Probably a rumour going around that there were 500 National Front skinheads coming to beat the shit out of us, so just waiting for the doors to burst open. And then getting on stage and being spat on and sometimes things thrown at you, but just like real sort of tension.
Not for me, matching flaws, sweeping up from not your fault. Not for me, so that rocks, just a running any guns. People lost me, my side do, such a number willing you. Human punch up, just like me, a written, just a side see. Standing on, I jump on it, but I'm coming shit about anything. Like a fly, silly wolf, all they are secret fools. You give us good money.
I think what Crass was trying to do, but it had to do it in an orderly way, was to say that it is possible. You know, it's possible to exist outside of the framework. G and myself have really fought hard to sort of understand what it means, rather than just sort of falling into sort of conventional ways of dealing with it. We've maintained the open door policy, we've maintained, you know, trying to expand and extend that and incorporate anyone in the same way as Crass incorporated anyone. Against a society which actually has been increasingly closing its doors. You know, I think that, you know, from the 70s, which was really our sort of era in a way, you know, the sort of liberationist era, you know, the fight's got harder and harder and harder.
Fuck the military money, there's something I want to say about the state of the nation, the way you treat us today. At school they give you shit, drop you in a pit. You try to get out, but you can't be took the facts about. Then you're a prime example, and that ain't us to be. This is just a sample, written up to you and me. Do they owe us a living? Of course I do, of course I do. Oh, us a living, of course I do, of course I do. Living, cause I fucking do.
Do you want me to do it? Or
No, I'm happy for that.
Alright, you're up for it. What was he playing in then?
You coming in? It might be an idea to see. Oh no, are we going to have the big fire tonight?
That's where the permitted.
Yeah, I think to start.
It wasn't big enough for it, kind of dries it.
So did anyone come up with any sort of interesting, or does anyone want to ask anything about the house or how it's run or what you've seen or not seen or anything? Or?
I'm quite interested in the Crass agenda and how that's evolved. I was speaking to Ron earlier about it and wanting to find out about it.
When I opened the doors up here, which was 40 years ago, whatever it was very much with the idea of being a creative centre. I mean, we were always organic because it's more sensible and it's cheaper, but always the prime reason for us being here, and most of the people who've remained as residents here have been artists or writers or filmmakers or musicians. And then in our spare time, effectively, we tend the garden and do all that stuff. And we've done masses of projects, you know, and Crass was the only project that ever became sort of renowned. It was a punk band, very, very political, very much, I mean, our major statement was there is no authority but yourself. You know, in other words, life's your responsibility. On the one hand, we're sort of viciously opposed to what then wasn't known as globalisation, but we defined as just being rampant capitalism. So on the one hand, we had a very political agenda, but on the other hand, we had a very DIY agenda of basically, well, get a life, sort yourself out, you know. On the one hand, to oppose the material world on every front, and at the same time, you know, offer practical ways of doing it. So on the one hand, we'd be sort of, you know, giving out handouts on how to make petrol bombs or something like that, you know, and at the same time, how to make your own bread.
They ask me why I'm hateful, why I'm bad. They tell me I've got things they never read. They tell me go to church and see the light. 'Cause the good look's always right. So what? So what? So what if Jesus died on the cross? So what about a fucker? I don't give a toss. So what if the master walked on the water? Don't see it, try to stop the slaughter. Say I wouldn't have to live from bins if I would go and look confess my sins. Say I shouldn't commit no crime, 'cause Jesus Christ is watching all the time. So what? So what? So what if he's always over my shoulder? Realise the truth as I get older. Get to see what a conny is, because it's my life, my notice. But I say they're gonna send me away. Say they're gonna make me pay.
Yeah, you be good. You stay. You stay. Yeah, I know. You stay. I won't be long. I'd heard about punk rock, but I hadn't seen it or anything. And then I came out of work one day and I noticed a poster for a band called The Clash that were playing at the Colston Hall. So I just went along to see what it was about, and I was just knocked out by it. That for the first time in my life there were a bunch of working class blokes, young men, looking absolutely really frightening, saying the sort of things that I'd always wanted to say, that previously I'd sort of got into David Bowie and things like this and sort of liked it, but it was never that. It was always that superstar thing, and now on the stage with these working class guys coming from the same background I had, saying exactly the things I wanted to say, and I was like, and then when Joe Strummer at the end of it said, if you think you can do better, start your own fucking band, and I was like, that's what I want to do that. So I went to visit Penny Rambo at Dale House. He was living there on his own at the time, and he said, what are you doing? And I said, I'm going to start a band. And he said, I'll play drums for you if you like. So then I said, well, what about other members? And he said, no, let's just have drums and vocals. And that's how it started.
I was writing a lot, and then one day Steve turned up. I'd been listening to Patti Smith and some of that sort of stuff. I'd got an old drum kit, and we just started mucking about. As we went on mucking about, other people would turn up and they wanted to muck about as well. And really that's how it was. I mean, we certainly didn't take ourselves seriously, and we certainly didn't expect anyone else to take us seriously. We had no ambition to, well, I had no ambition, Steve might have done, but I certainly had no ambition to do anything, you know, within a sort of consensual, within the construct.
What exactly did you want to say?
Fuck off, you bastards. I hate you. I want more money. Why do I have to work? Stop telling me what to do. All coppers are bastards. You know, what does a young man want to say when he's angry? And it's. But then, speaking with Penny Rambo, it was a bit more, well, perhaps have a, you know, just really think about what you want or what you don't like, and then be a bit more political about it, or, you know, personal political, so, and a bit more poetic, and, yeah. And then owe us a living. Of course they fucking do, so, yeah. And I still want to say those things anyway. So.
Oh, so you didn't change really?
No, but the trouble is now I don't know how to say it, you know, and there's me at 48 years old, still going, fuck off, I hate you. But it's not quite the same when you've got a boy.
I am a product, I am a symbol, I'm endless, I'm lost, fruitless, I'm lost, games. Well, I'm lost in match, don't sing my shit, cause I'm in volume in the such, not chatting the issue of my now. This is things I am body, my child, I don't know. Everyone wants them, I'm the arm for that body wants. I'm a snack on everyone's news, I'm the left for that body wants to touch. Much. I am a sample, I am a scapegoat, my useless, useless, aimless, mindless ideas. Well, let me know when I'm yet far away. My money on you sticking a job. I'm free trying to scare me aside. Now the bad shop, that kind of shop. I don't want your fucking system. I don't want to be on your face. Temptation to resist them. I want to be on shots.
There was a David Bowie song called Ziggy Stardust, and there's a line in it where he says, Ziggy played guitar, driving us that he was voodoo, the kids was just crass. And crass means grossly stupid and, you know, pathetic, so yeah, it's a good name. At that time, it was fun to be ignorant and stupid. Oh, that's why I chose the name Ignorant for myself, because at that time I was really ignorant about politics. I didn't know what I wanted or what I wanted to do. And people had said to me before, you're an ignorant bastard, Steve Ignorant. Simple as that.
Well, Steve was from, you know, basically quite a poor working class background, and I was from, you know, quite a wealthy upper class or upper middle class background. And generally speaking, I think it is true to say that most bands are made up of, you know, people from the same background, because generally speaking, younger people tend to hang around with people from their own background because it's more comfortable for them. And that did make us different. Well, my sort of middle class, sort of off the street experience, and Steve's working class on the street experience made a very, very interesting combination, I think.
Yeah, it's not that I'm right wing or nothing, but, you know, England is the best country in the world.
No.
I've never seen any difference between sort of bohemian, beatnik, hippie, punk. I mean, they're all one of the same to me. So, I mean, I regard that just as a sort of authenticity, and, you know, or an attempt to achieve some sort of authentic lifestyle.
Just one.
Despicable, no good lads, over nuts.
Thank you. Come on, earn your money. Fucking saucer! What a wanker! Fucking idiot! My brother took me to visit Dial House, and at that time I was not a skinhead, but it was the fashion afterwards in England called suede heads. And I went there and I couldn't understand what the hell was going on. These people had stones in their living room as ornaments, fucking stones in your house. They should be in the garden, using words that I'd never heard of before. But what I really liked about Penny Rambo and G was that for the first time in my life, if they asked me a question, or if I said something, they'd answer it and treat me as an equal. And it's the first time I'd ever had that, so I kept going back to visit. So when me and Penn were starting Crass, we could just take it didn't matter. It really didn't matter because I just used to live with my parents in Dagenham and whatever I said, because I was into poetry and all this sort of stuff, and I discovered a bloke called I'd read a book by a guy called Oscar Wilde called The Picture of Dorian Gray. I really got into poetry and started writing my own poetry and yeah, sort of writing songs because I wanted to be David Bowie. But my mum and dad always sort of said, oh, you know, you'll never do it in, you know, the usual working class thing, you'll end up in a factory. But for the first time, when I first met Penny Rambo and G, I was, for the first time, listened to as a human being or as an adult, even though I was only 13 years old, and tried to talk out of my little arsehole about Walt Whitman or something, having a conversation with a bloke who was older than me, who had been to college and sort of done things. I just thought that was fantastic. And for the first time, someone was actually interested in my opinion, and I'd never had that before, and that's a pretty, you know, that's a pretty big thing. And so when it was Crass, it was the same thing. There wasn't. We were just friends, you know, and I'd always respect him for that. He's always respected that for me, you know. And we really did blow away that upper class, working class divide, and we were just two guys doing it. We all lived in the same house. You couldn't have Crass without what was happening in our personal lives. It was all so interwoven, you can't separate them. So it never stopped. It wasn't like we went to the rehearsal studio and then played Crass. The rehearsal room was in our house, so it was like, right, okay, then what are we doing tomorrow, rehearsing? It never stopped. The phone was ringing. People were coming to visit all the time, you know, punks coming to camp in the garden and all this kind of, so you never got away from it. And the experience for me was just it never stopped, and it was a lifestyle. A good one. I wouldn't change, you know, I wouldn't change it. We never had rules. For example, if with 15 people living in the same place, if there was washing up to be done, it wasn't, you know, there wasn't a rota and on Wednesday Steve does the washing up. You just did it. And the whole way of living like that was, well, consideration for other people first.
Is it well and truly stuck? Is it well and
Has it
truly
gone?
stuck?
No, it's still up there. So I just come back. Just getting...
Mick's taking some film.
Oh,
Quick, get in it.
Quick. No, don't pretend.
It's just I was getting like so fucking swamped with those flies.
Yeah. Do you want some help or something?
Eh?
Do you want some help?
No, it's nothing to do with it.
How high is
Stay
it?
up there.
Right at the top, but I think it's only held by about 2 branches, as usual. What?
You just look cool.
That's all, just it's you.
Yeah, you were.
In 1967, I found the place. Well, I'd spent about a year driving around the southeast of England, sort of looking for somewhere. In those days, people, you know, wouldn't have dreamt of moving into somewhere like this. Nowadays, they're very fashionable, very, very valuable. I saw a film, it's the end of The Sixth Happiness. There's a movie about Chinese inns, and they had this tradition of people turning, you know, like walking to the inn, and then they would tell their story, then the next day they'd move on and go somewhere else. And I was rather inspired at the idea of sort of opening up somewhere where people could come and they'd sort of pay for their supper and a bed by telling a story. That was my romantic idea. And my romantic idea was that if people liked it, they'd do something similar. So by now, 40 years later, or 38 years later, I thought there'd be hundreds of places like this right across Britain. But in fact, no one, as far as I know, has ever attempted to recreate the system that this place works on, because, as you know, it's not a commune, it's an open door. Most communes manage to survive based around some sort of ideology or religion or whatever, and I'm not interested in sort of shared ideologies or religions. And the open door policy, which is the one we have operated on since then, allows people to come and it allows people to go, and it allows conflicts to develop and allows loves to develop, all sorts of things without any condition. It's a very unconditional state of affairs. And creatively, I suppose that was reflected in the sense that, you know, if someone said, oh, can I join the band? And there wasn't any question as to yes or no. I mean, it was an automatic, of course you can, what can you do? And it didn't matter if they couldn't do anything at all, like Andy. I mean, he hadn't got a clue what to do with the guitar, but, you know, he got one and made a noise on it, so that's good enough.
We kind of got very excited about, you know, the punk scene when the first wave of it seemed really exciting. At last, you know, there was a youth culture growing that was saying, well, just fuck off, you know, and all the rest of it. Well, we felt it was, but then it started to sort of sour for us because I suppose the idea of no future was sort of not in our realm. I suppose, you know, we were accused of being old hippies. Well, fine, you know, the old hippies had a dream and we still dream it, you know, and still aim for that, you know, and which is about coming together. And, you know, that's difficult in itself. So I suppose we took up that area of music and expression because none of us were musicians particularly, and the whole ethos was just get up and do it, just express it.
They have the world that they bleed dry. They are the true pornographers, the real stylists in human perversion, rich, educated tarts that dumbly by watching their...
I'm not a great stage person, so it suited me with Crass to, you know, do the artwork and film work and anything else I could, you know, write songs and the artwork was really the covers. Yeah, I mean, it was really the involvement with the whole aesthetic of presentation, really, because I think it's really, really important. It's another language. I mean, and we were all very interested in not only the words, not only the sound, but the presentation and how we could try something very new and try to cut through and find a new language, really. It seems to have been very positive for a lot of people on different levels. I mean, hopefully it didn't... Well, I know it didn't come over as dictatorial at all in what we were trying to say. I think obviously came over very angry.
Good Lord!
Quick, get out of here. I'm off. I should go off with this. There's some in that one. Can you turn the other one off first?
Yeah.
Mathieu.
Hey! It's Ron!
Would you see the fire from your sanctuary of death? What terrible pain you need to hide. In your hatred, you'd seek to destroy the earth. What is it that you have been denied?
It will fulfil a lot of the needs we feel for a standard family that would live there. It won't do everything, okay, but as a start, as a way of reducing the impact on needing supermarkets, we thought that was one way we could start.
What now? Now you would destroy the earth. Drive the beds. What now? Now in your control, birth and death, dry the bodies.
What we're doing this weekend, we're running a basic introduction to permaculture weekend. It's looking at just different ways, sustainable living really. It's looking at ways we can grow our food sustainably, build sustainable housing, forestry management, water management, all kinds of aspects of human life really that we can actually do in more sustainable ways than we are currently in our culture at the moment.
To absorb it and seal it so that you don't get smells, you know.
Lifting the lid.
Is it supported by anything then? Will it, I mean, that looks a bit precarious, like you could fall.
Yeah, I mean, well, you'll get used to it.
Yeah.
No, I mean, it's all going to be boxed in, and there's going to be a structure.
There'll be a surrounding structure.
Yeah, that was just that's just a demonstration, to be honest.
Yeah.
Hey, you know what I thought? Up there, there's two desks which actually are still as desks.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, we could use one of them because they're double lidded. Look, and that fits.
Yeah.
As a sort of, so to use the bog, you lift that up.
Yeah, that would.
And the other
totally
one
enclose.
could enclose the
Yeah.
grass or whatever, and it would look neat.
It would.
It's ready made with hinges.
We need to. Yeah. So
Yeah.
we've got to have that space, haven't we?
Yeah.
Well, there was this idea of going and get another spade.
Mine!
I a bit zapperish.
Oh, lovely lad.
Yeah. I think we should.
You can actually see it go down.
Shall I
too.
drop one?
No!
You swear by the fuck you like, but you're still on the roof. I'm not gonna change the system. They're not gonna change the system. We're not gonna change the system. We're not telling you, we're not telling me. J'aime la tête sur pas de tout, on n'a pas de la fou. Quand on a avec des malheureux, j'entends cette game. For us swimming vigorous, feed us some and face up. Kill us some with shoot right up. Leave that option now, just what have they got? Fuck all now, what have they got? Swimming pools, where do you get it? Follow the rules, system. Keep their fingers on the brakes, then a let us understand. For a better cool to shoot.
The whole philosophy of the open house, it was set up as a creative house, whatever that meant to people. So there's been films, books, music, everything written here or done, painted here, or gardening. It didn't have to be the fine arts. It went into all sorts of things, Some people make a great art of making a fine cup of tea, which is fantastic, making bread. It has the extension, logical extension is really doing something with a heart. So that whole ethos has never changed really, and Crass wasn't any different, and all the things that have happened since is not any different. The spirit's the same.
No, is the swift answer to that. There were three, unless there are more
Unless there were more down the bottom there.
One of the greatest battles I've ever fought is just to remain in this place, you know, which is rightfully mine. You know, because commodity culture wanted it because it's worth a lot of money. Doesn't matter whether it's sort of, you know, the burial ground and the creation ground of soul, you know, they want it. We effectively used an awful lot of the tactics and techniques that we'd developed with Crass on a much more sort of intimate level, you know, with the local village and the local townspeople, and we formed an action group which was made up of people from the right, left, centre and everywhere else, who all wanted in some way or other, or for one reason or another, to try and preserve something of the sort of countryside that this whole area represents, and were willing to sort of spend time to do that. And we first of all beat off BT, who, you know, is a massive corporation, which was a huge success, and they wanted to turn this just into one huge sort of luxury housing estate for the wealthy, with sort of big hotels and golf courses and shit knows what else. We did buy it on borrowed money from friends, and we still owe half of what we bought the house for, which was 160,000, which is very, very cheap, of course, but and it was very, very cheap because we were in it. I mean, it's not worth an awful lot to people, and people knew they couldn't get us out because we'd already won that case in the courts. I mean, what I want to do, what I hope I'm able to do, is to finish paying off the house and then put it into trust, because that way, you know, maybe in 50 years, there'll still be people like us sitting around talking about nice things.
Buy now, let's go. Buy now, say hello, convince school to your life. To enter Traverse Paradise and transmit dignity. A lovely colour consulting makes you watch your church and days they fight. Dreaming of things that money can buy. Rust on shit, plastic crap. My life might be worth more than that. Black nose can own, jumping spray. I'm no faker, I'm on a sea. Lust on to our wood, fish race.
Oh, happy days! The sort of goal he scores so often for Chelsea for the keeper.
Steve, did you hear that David Beckham was wearing a Crass t-shirt?
Yes, I did. Designed by Jean-Paul Gaultier. Now, at that time I didn't really think anything. It was just like, well, that kind of stuff. People have been selling Crass merchandise for like years, and I've not bothered about it, so why should I bother about it now, you know? And I didn't. But it's only recently that since I've had numerous people coming to me and saying loads of Crass stuff is being sold on the internet, and there's a bloody clock with a Crass symbol on it, that or Eve Libertine with the flag from the Feeding of 5,000 thing. Buy a clock, you can buy, you know, obviously t-shirts, little coasters, tea towels and shit like this, and all of that money is going somewhere, and I don't know where the fucking hell it's going, so I just want to try and stop that.
It seemed very ironic that, you know, probably one of the wealthiest non-landed gentry, or well, certainly he must be one of the wealthiest people in this country, was wearing a Crass t-shirt. And then I just forgot about it. I mean, I did sort of think of following it up by maybe doing a t-shirt with him on it, wearing a Crass t-shirt. And I just thought it'd be ironic to produce a t-shirt of him wearing a Crass t-shirt with something like, you know, David supports Crass. And see, you know, how long it would be before their lawyers tried it on with us.
At the moment we're being ripped off, and we're not getting paid for it. Well, what we could do is still get ripped off but be paid for it. You know, this is the year 2006 now, it's not 1981 or whatever. The world has changed, and it's...
And what do you mean by that?
That it's not... In the late 70s and the early 80s, it was possible to live on a dole, and it was possible to not have a job, or you could live without money. Now you can't. It's really fucking difficult. You've got to have money. You've got to... Not you've got to have money. I sound like a fucking capitalist, you know, just on about money all the time. And it's not that. It's just the world is different now, and you have to move with it. And and I just am so frustrated with the thought that some fucking big company, you know, don't even know who Crass were, but it's the product sells well, so they're fucking selling it and getting the money for it, and we're not getting nothing. Fuck it. Bollocks, that's got to stop. That's just crap.
That's it. The old rehearsal room. And there's an old drum skin with a Crass symbol on it. The only bit remaining. It's been lots of things since then. It used to be completely lined with carpet, and then we had carpet and strips right across the ceiling so that it, you know, soundproofed it a bit, because it was pretty bloody noisy in there, as you can imagine, with 5 of us playing. But, yeah. Look at the mic here. Oh, there we go. Yeah, I told you we lost all the banners, didn't we? In Amsterdam. But one remained, which has to be the right one, really, doesn't it? Oh, yeah, there you go. I should be doing "There is no force but yourself," all right? Yeah. Yeah. The one remainder. Now an old Remo head. Whoa!
Who invented the cross symbol?
There's a guy called Dave King, who was an art student, friend, who lived here. It was a frontispiece for the book I was writing, because the book was about the state, the church and the family, and I wanted something which, you know, was a sort of like the sort of fascism of that control, and that was the symbol, which I think was a very brilliant piece of design. Serpent eating its own tail, basically, destroying itself.
And how exactly was Crass socially and politically active? How direct?
Well, obviously, as an information service, we were very powerful. I mean, it was pre-internet, pre-computers, really. You know, so we didn't have that sort of outlet. But I mean, the network we had was absolutely massive. Our own involvements were, well, varied from sort of soft edge stuff like graffiti campaigns, which were very, very carefully done, militaristically done, graffitiing the central part of the underground network in London. We'd start doing statements, you know, neatly. We never sprayed on property, we sprayed on posters. So say there was a war poster, you know, like a film poster for a war movie. Then we'd have "Fight War Not Wars" on it, you know, very neatly. And we had this policy of being very neat so that it was sort of couldn't really be complained about as vandalism. Not because I object to vandalism necessarily, but because it seemed a way in which we might be able to attract the interest of people who otherwise could dismiss it as vandalism. So it varied from that to sort of more, you know, direct actions of sort of super gluing or paint bombing, that sort of stuff. I mean, we never got into any sort of arson. Stop the City events of the early 80s, I suppose, were the most extreme manifestation of that, in the sense that they were a sort of mixture of part festival, part riot. Well, the idea was to close down the city, and I can't remember, there's 2 days in the year when certain figures are shifted in the city from one institution to another. It's when they, you know, decide on the currency, all that sort of shit. Anyway, basically speaking, if you put the city out of operation on those days, then, you know, you're really fucking up their entire modus operandi, like the banks and shipping agencies and that sort of stuff. You know, from sort of smoke bombs in the underground, which completely has to stop the undergrounds, to, you know, banks were having their windows smashed in, streets were blocked, phones were blocked. I mean, the place became inoperable for a day. I believe, you know, that it set a pattern. I mean, certainly Reclaim the Streets came out of the Stop the City movement, and, you know, inevitably, I think that, and the Stop the City thing actually did spread right across the globe. I mean, it started happening in Australia, America. I don't know whether it happened in Europe at all, but certainly modelled on the London ones. It was repeated in, I know, in Australia and America, you know, and I don't think that Seattle would have happened in the same way.
How does it feel? How does it feel to be the mother of 1,000 dead? Your voice breaks down, oh, break, oh, oh. How does it feel to be the mother of 1,000 dead? Right now, and you coming into your your language has got these big bodies of light. You're the six-fold thing that people have got to sacrifice. You're not persuading people to accept the most people life. You're building right legs to and the natural pain. You started a process that was so proud of fame. Your inhumanity stops you from realize the pain that you're inflicting. You determine your creation, you are an
We released a record called How Does It Feel to Be the Mother of 1,000 Dead? And writing for one of the daily newspapers here was a guy who did the music bit in it, or the pop bit, fucking prick. And his brother was a Conservative politician in Enfield. So he says to his brother, look, what this band called Crass have done, they've written about how does it feel to be the mother, so the politician gets the arsehole, says how outrageous the record is and it's disgusting. Then we found, of course, then there was a circular, a memo passed around the House of Parliament in the Tory party saying on no account must any member of the Conservative Party have anything whatsoever to do with a band known as the name of Crass. The opposition Labour government heard about it. We then started receiving letters of support from the Labour MPs, and then a Labour MP actually mentioned it in the House of Commons at Prime Minister's question time. Has the Prime Minister listened to the latest record? How does it feel to be the mother of 1,000 dead?
Thatcher needed something to boost her public faith. She was failing miserably on her agenda, on her, you know, internal agenda, and needed something to boost her popularity. I mean, it was very jingoistic, and she did do. How the fucking hell did, you know, Bush manage to, you know, gain credibility through going into Iraq? Well, he has done, you know, despite the fact that I mean, and how has Blair remained in power after supporting the invasion of Iraq? But they do because people are essentially jingoistic. Look at a football match. You'll see one tonight and see how jingoistic. I mean, it doesn't matter whether it's guns or footballs, you know. When the men are out, they're out, aren't they? It's very difficult, you know, for a country in a state of war to actually dare to say, I object. you know, because, I mean, we were accused of being traitors, you know, both in the national media and by people down in pubs and that sort of shit. We put together a conversation between Thatcher and Reagan, which was edited out of actual speeches. And the basis of the conversation was basically Reagan questioning Thatcher about the sinking of the Belgrano. We had had classified information from the Falklands. We knew a sailor who used to be a skinhead, and he was heading out to the Falklands. And then he contacted us somehow or other as he was returning and just spewed out all this information about the sinking of the Belgrano and the sinking of the Sheffield. The sinking of the Sheffield was something that still hasn't really come to light. I think it was 4 ships. It was one of the big flagships that actually Prince Andrew or Prince Edward, but one of the royal sons was on board. So obviously they had to ensure that that wasn't going to get whacked. The naval response was to order that 3 of the 4 ships should send up flak, you know, which is silver foil, which diverts missiles. Yeah. And the other one wasn't informed, the Sheffield. So it guaranteed that when the missiles arrived, they would go for the one which wasn't protected by a foil shield, which it did. So the Sheffield was sunk. And the men knew that, you know, and there was almost a mutiny, which is why the boats took so long coming back, because they had to sort that out. We are familiar with Emperor and Secretary A reached an agreement. All to tender was in Vega. Don't hesitate. It's the news now pounded. Subsequent to oh God, it's not high scores, but heavy. Wait a minute. Those are missiles that we follow on the screens. We might have to. And let them know. What do we think again? What I said before. Thank you. Attention students. Want incentives at all levels. Pete took the tapes out to mainland Europe, sent it to all the major newspapers in mainland Europe, and then that night we heard nothing, and then the next thing we heard was a report in some American, I think it was a San Francisco paper, about KGB tapes, Pentagon exposing KGB tapes, and we recognised them as being our tape. You know, and then it became a really big story in the American press about, you know, KGB, these are the methods used, you know, to what will lead to the Third World War. And anyway, this guy rang up, this reporter, and said, do you know anything about these tapes? And I picked up the phone and I said, no, I don't know what you're talking about. He said, well, I think you do, and I want to come out and talk to you about it. So I said, well, look, if we were to admit it, would you be prepared to print all the information that's given on the tapes about the Sheffield and the Belgrano? And he said, yes, I could do that. And they did do it, you know, so we managed to get, you know, this sort of really, you know, top secret classified information about the Belgrano and the Sheffield into the national, you know, the good quality press. It had no effect at all whatsoever, except this sort of huge interest in us all of a sudden. And, you know, and at that point the KGB actually did get in touch with us, under the guise of being a literary magazine, and invited us up to their offices in West London, you know, which was obviously a complete sham. And it quite obviously was KGB, and basically they were seeing whether we were worth recruiting. And from that point on it just became fucking stupid, because we were no longer commentators and activists, you know, we'd become sort of experts or something or other. Well, certainly we became desirables to the secret services and that sort of rubbish. And it started feeling really dangerous, to be honest.
Pacify, classify, keep in line, you're doing fine. Lost your voice? There ain't no choice. Play the game, silent and tight, with a passive observer. Sit back and look at the world they destroy and the peace that they took. Ask no questions, hear no lies, and you'll be living in the comfort of a false paradise. I've got a passive observer, it's a mix for you. You're already dead, you're already dead. The right to stop watching, I shut up. You're already dead, you're already dead. The road to the edge of this trust me to that road to make the connection. Still believe the system, then your protection. You're already dead, you're already dead.
There are flames anyway, so it's looking better.
Why do you think Crass was successful at the time?
Because we meant what we were saying, you know, we lived that truth. You know, we lived what we were talking about, and it was self-evident that we did. You know, people could come here and they were welcome to come here, as they always have been, and they could see that we were living, you know, we didn't make anything. Well, I mean, we had lots of money at lots of the time, but that all went into other projects.
Yeah, that makes me laugh.
I've seen people do that, like, yeah. Think, oh, well, the fact that Crass earned money made no difference at all to this place. We still had no money, and we still have no money, because any money we do have just goes straight into some sort of creative or social project. We financed an anarchist centre in London. That's the most obvious thing we did, but and probably one of the most costly things we did. But I mean, we never, every gig that we did, any money that we made went to some local organisation, you know, Rape Crisis Centre, or maybe some kid wanted to make a fanzine, or some band needed a speaker, or the youth club needed a table or a ping pong table or something. But we never ever, we took what we needed, which was enough to pay the petrol, have some food. We never stayed in hotels or anything like that. We just asked people where they got somewhere we could stay. And we always used to come back devastatingly broke, although a lot of money had been made.
Jimmy Percy from Sham 69 was working with Polydor, and it was a thing he was going to do called Percy's Package. So we'd already decided, fuck you, we're doing all right on our own, yeah, Crass Records, we're doing fine, thanks. Let's go and see what they've got to offer. So we go in there, and of course it's the guy shows us in, and there's the guy behind his desk with a big bowl of flowers and all the drinks, da-da-da, and I'm like, yeah, don't worry. And this drink arrives from this guy, I'm like, ooh. And he goes, now, I can market your revolution. I can get you into property. You'll have so much money. And I was like, oh, sounds fantastic. Nah, fuck it.
So, what did you say to him?
Thanks, but no thanks. We were polite. So, yeah, just weren't interested. How could you do it? How could we do it? And to this day, do you know what I mean? I still can't do things where I feel like I might be not selling out, but where my conscience pricks me, and it's a pretty good thing to have, because it means, well, hopefully I'll never sell out if that still is relevant.
Yes, that's right. Hard case, then it's just another tape for a country mistake. Bubblegum rock and plastic chances. Your boss edition back up into the motors. 3 years promote the clash. And the revolution is just some cash. They become a fashion like hippie used to be. I can't think of doing what me. Mimics seduce systems kill. Mimics express the public will. I become a mimic because you feel lost. Then it's sold out, now you're gonna cost. Punk glasses and when I'm touching no pub. Steve Jones started doing real work. It's revolution and a kid joke. Stuck from the system and give me snow. Well, I'm tired of staring through shit stained glass. Tired of staring at my superstars. I'm gonna
Ignorant and G.
Yeah.
God. Romantic, even.
Oh, the master's still up.
Mm.
That's Joy.
Ron,
Ron.
me, and Nima.
That doesn't seem so long ago, that. Strange, isn't it? Doesn't look like you at all.
It doesn't, does it?
No. Really weird.
How did Crass end?
I think there was a schism developing. Well, I don't think, I know there was. We did a tour in 83, I think it was, and I wrote a article questioning the honesty of pacifism, in the sense that it's very easy to preach it, but can you follow it through? But anyway, that was, you know, it was becoming obvious by then that, you know, there was a very distinct separation going on. And it wasn't just sort of the pacifist activist thing, it was the security, not security thing, or the sort of spiritual materialist thing, all sorts of different things, you know, there were schisms appearing. And so there's that. I mean, that's a simple thing, but it's quite an important thing, because some of the people were obviously sort of, well, they were sort of looking at it as a livelihood. Well, I don't get that. I don't understand livelihood. You know, I understand life, but I don't understand livelihood. You know, I think it's a sort of absurdity. We're not prostitutes. I'm not a prostitute.
I was actually quite ill, physically ill. I kind of wore myself out, because for me it was continual. You know, the band kind of rehearsed and did the gigs, and, you know, I would be there doing the films, you know, operating a lot of the stuff. But when I got back, I would have to start a new cover. So it was quite an intense kind of 8-9 years. You know, when we stopped, we knew we were going to stop then anyway. We'd always said 1984. So when Andy left, I think 83 or beginning of 84, we knew that was a natural ending anyway. So there was no way we would replace him. He just wanted to get back to what he really wanted to do, was painting and stuff. And I think he was worn. I think everybody was worn out, quite honestly. You know, and also, you know, the whole way we'd been put on a pedestal, you know, and the way people were waiting for Crass to, what should we do next, you know, and that wasn't what we were there for. You know, it was to empower people, not to empower people to say, well, what do we do now? You know, where do we go next? You know, that wasn't our role. You know, we were just trying to share maybe an insight that we felt we had and experiences that we'd had. In the very beginning, 1984 was the cut-off time anyway. If we couldn't say what we wanted to say in that time, then there was no point in going on. So
Then it would be an institution.
Yeah, exactly, and that's what it was becoming, and we weren't interested in it.
You know, 7 years away from your own being is a long time, and we all were.
Is that what it felt like?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we were living we were living we were living a theatre, you know, for day and night. You know, I remember once making love with Eve and thinking, oh, I'm making love to Eve Libertine. I'm not making love to Bron Jones, who's my girlfriend. You know, I'm making love to a sort of idea. You know, that sort of thing, and you sort of realise that actually, in 7 years you can become quite an idea of yourself, and not yourself, because you've forgotten who yourself was. Because every day, every fucking moment, you know, it's either in the studio, writing a song, doing an interview, being this, being that. You know, you didn't have time to know who you were, and that's why it was so painful for us when the band stopped, because suddenly, you know, you'd be sitting at breakfast and there'd be someone sitting the other, and you'd think, well, who the fuck are you? Because we hadn't got the common connection anymore.
I am alone. I don't know about you. and I am the moment, and I am the grace, and this is my time, and this is my place. I won't accept no sorry apology, no pale reflection of possibility. There is no force but my own.
In a way, when we were writing stuff, or when I was writing stuff for Crass, you know, I was defining, you know, a way of living, you know, especially there is no authority but yourself. You know, which basically, I suppose because G and myself have stayed here, we've had to try and live up to that. You know, all the time we're being, like you've come here because of that. You know, basically to see if we were doing it. You know, well, that's true, isn't it, in a way? You know, to what extent did that dream work? And I mean, that's a question we both ask ourselves all the time. You know, to what extent does the dream work? You know, how could we make it work better? Commodity culture has got such a stranglehold, you know, and seems to be an increasing stranglehold that you know, the pockets of resistance you know, might be becoming very isolated.
Where are the angry young men and women of today that are actually saying, apart from little you might see a punk rock band in a pub somewhere, but where are these people in the establishment? Or in the established, you know, pop world or the music industry who are saying, this is fucking wrong, fuck you, stand up and, you know, what happened to that voice? It's all sort of gone.
You alone can do it. There is no authority but yourself.